What about typical pitfalls or like problems that often happen? I mean, Alex, what have you seen out there? Like, oh, this always goes south, or this misunderstanding is really typical. I mean, what kind of common pitfalls do you see in terms of hiring a mobile app developer?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the one of the things that could go wrong is you develop the wrong product. So I'm kind of a big fan of the kind of lean startup approach, where you kind of do some experimentation. You launch your MVP, and then you refine from what you learn from that MVP versus spending 6 months to a year launching a huge product and then kind of realizing that that you've built the wrong product. And depending on what kind of outsourcing you're talking about, you hear stories about people in Elance and some of those things where they don't the project never finishes, or they don't get access to the code base and things like that. So you kind of do get what you pay for in that term. So you just need to make sure to have kind of a development shop that's going to write maintainable code, unit test your code. So basically have a long-term view of things where you can kind of not just shoot out an app and then leave you hanging. It's write an app in a well-based best practices manner that you can kind of maintain in the long run, and then pair program with your team if team's going to be taking over that pair program with them, so that the essentially the app doesn't go over budget. It's not the wrong product. There's no bugs, things like that. So that's kind of some of the pitfalls that can go wrong. And then the one other thing that I would mention is that to echo Tim, make sure to insist on working software all the time. So the first couple of weeks you should start seeing software in your hands versus having to wait 6 months, and then that's going to be the wrong product that you weren't envisioning in the beginning of the process.
You're saying there'd be a partially working prototype within a few weeks?
Yeah, and you should definitely communicate with your shop frequently. In an agile-based methodology, you can have daily stand-ups, have working software at the end of the sprints that you can actually have on your phone and play with, and that's very important versus having to wait end of the project and then you realize you've gotten the wrong product developed.
A prototype's a little different, but yeah, you should be getting some of your features working. Like, if you want us to build a prototype, we'll build you something more throwaway, all of us. But even if you're not building a prototype, if you're not seeing something delivered, what's going on? What are they doing? And really common with outsourcers, particularly offshore, you could be months in, and they've just piled up all this code that doesn't quite work, and then you're stuck with this pile, and they expect you to pay the bill. Mm-hmm. I think Alex and I, it sounds like, have cleaned up after some of the same sorts before. The biggest pitfall, I think, is when outsourcing is thinking that cheap saves you money rather than cheap costs you a whole lot of money. Mm-hmm. So I definitely seen that going with like an independent who seems will quote you lower is going to cost you a lot more when you get press mentions and your site is down and you come to us and you spent your budget and you're like, now fix it, and we're like, okay.
Rupin, what sort of horror stories have you heard, or what are some typical misunderstandings that companies need to be aware of before they go out and spend their money on a mobile app?
Well, I mean, I think it's all the stuff that Tim and Alex have been talking about. I think the post, so there's two, I guess, categories, I would say. One is the experience that you have with the development shop while the app is being built. Are you getting feature drops regularly? Are you getting status updates regularly? Are you getting what you thought you were buying? So there are a lot of cases where you're not getting anything close to what you thought you were buying, and you end up having to abandon with that shop and move on to another shop. But I think the most horrifying stories are the ones that happen after the app's been released and you actually have paying customers. Because at this point, you don't have the luxury of just simply picking up and going to another shop. You've got a working code base out there. And so I had a client not too long ago who I'll leave unmentioned, but they had an app in production with thousands of users out there, and their previous developers had decided to go off and do something else, and simply said they weren't interested in helping do any more development.
Sure, we all change our mind.
Yeah, and it's particularly problematic in this day and age where there's so many new technologies and there's a lot of competition for developers, and developers can just get tired or burnt out and decide to take a trip to Europe for half a year. Sure. So that can leave you as a business in a bit of a problem. And essentially, in this case, what ended up happening is they took all the keys with them, if you will. So All the update the application also were not properly handed over to the company. The company didn't know to ask for that. They also used old versions of libraries that needed to be upgraded for camera access, things like that. So horror stories probably have a wide range. I think the worst are probably after an app has been successful and you need to change it or update it or fix some bugs.
Right.
You definitely need access to the make sure to ask access for the source code, as well as any app store permissions and things like that that you would need. Because there's definitely horror stories of people having developed a product and not getting access to their source code and being held ransom for that. So
and then they say, oh, well, I have this app, and you're like, well, where's the code? And they're like, what does that mean? You don't actually have an app. You have someone else built an app, and you have to get that from them.
So it's the exact opposite of open source. Not only is it proprietary, only the developer, him or herself, knows the source code.
And the worst horror story I've seen in this has actually happened repeatedly enough to become a trope, that the developer actually had a nervous breakdown and went severely unbalanced, while developing the code. One of them, he kept writing, so it was Lovecraftian code.
He went off his meds in the middle of the project?
What was that?
He went off his meds in the middle of the project?
Yeah, I don't want to shame mental health issues.
No.
I think what happens is under the stress of a untechnically skilled product person, a independent developer who doesn't have is alone by themselves, just sort of, and they're behind the ball and they can't quite get it done, and someone's asking unrealistic amounts.
Right.
They just start hedging, and the pressure, they just break under it. But yeah, this project it was relying on syntax errors to run, invalid code. It was and then for developers after independents trying to spend as little as possible to fix it, layered on and tried to fix it. So you've just bounced from place to place.
Right.
But saying be careful, cheap can be very expensive. And yeah, we've definitely seen if it is after you have users, as Ruben said, it's really bad when you've had good press, and your site is breaking.
Right.
Super sad.